Hey guys, Joe Harper here with Reformed Truther Ministries. I've titled this video today The Liberal Vatican, and today I'm going to be talking about what's been going on with the Roman Catholic Church with the Synod on Synodality. So, for those of you who do not know, the past few months in October, Pope Francis had the Catholic Church commence the Synod on Synodality, and this has been a synod where the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, the bishops, the archbishops, the cardinals, have gathered together and they've discussed the policy of the Roman Catholic Church for the future. They've discussed potential doctrinal changes for the future, even though some of the documents denied that there would be any doctrinal changes. But there have been a lot of discussion about potentially massive shifts in the direction of Roman Catholicism, which has been to the delight of the liberals and the modernist faction of the Roman Catholic Church, and which has caused a great amount of concern amongst Roman Catholic traditionalists. And the reason why I want to talk about this today is because Roman Catholicism has a very central place in Bible prophecy. I'm going to talk about this more at the end of the video. In that, even for evangelical Christians who really don't really care about, even though they should care more than they do, even though they may not care about what's going on within the Roman Catholic Church, these events have potentially a very large impact for the future of the world going forward. And I'm going to be talking about that today. So, just to recap here, Pope Francis is the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. He has been Pope now for about 10 years. He took office as Pope back in 2013 following the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. And Pope Francis, formerly Jorge Bergoglio, is a Argentinian Jesuit priest who eventually became a cardinal and then pope. And the Jesuits are the most powerful faction within the Roman Catholic Church. They are the powers behind the throne, as it were. And this has been the case within Roman Catholicism for centuries now. Really, ever since the order was restored following their dissolution in 1773, they were restored as an order in 1814, and ever since then they have consolidated their control completely over the Vatican. And the crowning of Pope Francis as Pope was the crowning achievement of the consolidation of Jesuit power over the Vatican. And ever since then, Pope Francis has been a tool, an instrument for the Jesuits for implementing the policy that they want to see put forward. And what are these policies? That the Jesuits want to take the Roman Catholic Church in a more liberal direction as part of their overall goals of bringing the entire world together religiously, politically, economically. They believe that the implementation of more liberal religious and moral and social values, both within and without Roman Catholicism, are going to advance their goals. And so, as a result of this, that they had Pope Francis commence what was called the Synod on Synodality. And a synod is a gathering of Roman Catholic leaders where they get together and they discuss the future of the Roman Catholic Church. They discuss various issues of policy within the church. They'll discuss doctrinal matters. And this synod was appropriately called the Synod on Synodality because amongst the things were discussed was the potentiality of a more, quote, synodal way of governing the church, where instead of the Pope being so hierarchically top down, he would be reigning more collegially with the consent and advice of his bishops. And this has been an idea that's been floated around in Roman Catholic circles, really going back to Vatican II. This idea that maybe the Pope, instead of being the Antichrist monarch that he is, that he could reign more collegially with the consent and help of his bishops. Um, but the Jesuits have had an agenda to move the Roman Catholic Church in a more liberal direction, and this is significant because when you look at the various lists of policies that they've hoped to implement it, and some of these got discussed this past October at the synod. They've had an agenda of, there's been talk about potentially ordaining female Roman Catholic deacons, which potentially could be a stepping stone to eventually having female priests. There's been a lot of talk about how the clergy should handle the issue of divorced and remarried people who, according to traditionalist Roman Catholic doctrine, they are not supposed to take communion because of the fact that it is a sin for them to be remarried. But there has been a lot of pressure upon the Roman Catholic leadership to change their policies on this because divorces in the West have gone up dramatically, they've gone up exponentially, and many divorced people have gotten remarried, and this has put a lot of pressure upon the church to change along with the times. So there's been a lot. So this has been one of the issues discussed. There's been, and then there's been a lot of support of taking the Roman Catholic Church in a direction that supports socialism and communism. And this is no surprise because, once again, Pope Francis is not only is he a Jesuit priest, when the Jesuits have been supporting socialism and communism for quite a long time now, but he is an Argentinian Jesuit from South America, and the priests in Latin America, and especially the Jesuits, have been known for supporting what's been called liberation theology. And liberation theology is, to put it frankly, it's Roman Catholic communism, where they've changed the gospel. Instead of emphasizing the true gospel that Jesus came to this world to save sinners from their sins, to save the elect, the emphasis is that Jesus is a revolutionary, as it were, who's came to lift the oppressed workers of the world, the poor and the impoverished, out of their poverty. It turns the gospel into a social gospel. It turns it into a politicized gospel, where Jesus is a means of, empowering the workers to revolt against, the bourgeoisie oppressors of this communist gospel. That's what liberation theology essentially is in a nutshell. That's a very, very simplified version of it, but that's essentially what it is. And so there's been a huge support. Well, really going back to Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Church switched from an opposition to communism around the world to supporting it. And this was seen especially in Latin America and in Africa in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and in the 90s, and it's gone up right up today. And Pope Francis, even though he won't come out and openly say it, he is a communist. He supports communist goals. He never will openly admit this because the fact he always speaks in very Jesuitical fashion, as he does on every single issue. And then there's been a huge push for supporting the green agenda, the global warming agenda, the radical environmentalist agenda. There was a separate synod before this synod, the Synod on Synodality, which was the synod on the Amazon, where they even had natives from the Amazon come into the Vatican and perform some of their native rituals that they would typically perform in the Amazon. And their Pope Francis gave a lot of rhetoric for supporting measures to fight climate change, to fight global warming. And these policies are being continued because that is part of the greater globalist agenda that's a part of the New World Order. And the reason why they want to use the radical environmentalist movement, they want to use global warming, because if you can present a threat like global warming, where the temperatures are going up, the seas may rise, that's a global threat if you believe that, and therefore that can be such a great instrument to get all the independent nations of the world to play by the same rules. You can implement things like climate tax. You can implement regulations that go across nations. You have these powerhouses, superpowers, Russia, China, the United States, they all have different policies regarding industry standards and business and commerce. And if you can use the UN to implement, taxes or put regulations on admissions, you're implementing globalism. You're putting in policies in place that transcend the individual governments of nations. And that's why the green agenda is so important. And Pope Francis has been supporting that. And then there's been a huge push to support and affirm homosexuals, the LGBTQ plus community, and that's the most consistent of them. So at this synod, the things that were discussed primarily would be the divorced and remarriage issue, the female deacons was discussed, and then Pope Francis, most importantly, he expressed openness to blessing LGBTQ plus the community. He said it in Jesuitical fashion, but he said that he would be willing to bless them or open to blessing them in the future. And really, what I think is going on is that all of these policies are these things are going to be the Roman Catholic Church, unless the Lord dramatically intervenes to wipe all this out. This is the agenda that is going to continue to take the Roman Catholic Church going forward is going to continue to implement these policies. These are doctrines are going to come in more and more and more. Now they're going to do it in Jesuitical fashion. The Jesuits, what they do is they always put their finger up in the air. They see which way the wind is blowing. And if they get too much pushback, they may slow this agenda down. If they feel like they can continue to make strides forward, they'll speed it up. But whether sooner or later, they're going to continue to implement these things regardless, but they're going to do it in a way that minimizes the amount of opposition in comparison to the price they're willing to pay in comparison to the speed they want to implement their policies. They're going to continue to talk out of both sides of their mouth, and that's what's going to happen. So this is essentially what's happened. I'm really generalizing what's happened at this synod, but they had this synod, and they've talking about these issues, and these things are really significant because of the fact that Roman Catholicism plays such a central role in Bible prophecy. Now, I've talked about this in numerous of other videos, that I believe that the system of Roman Catholicism, the religious system, is Mystery Babylon that's prophesied in Revelation 17. We also see it in the two beasts of Revelation 13. We see it in the prophecies of Daniel 7. But this system of Antichrist, and then the Pope of Rome, not just the current Pope, Pope Francis, but every single Pope who sits on his throne is at the time of his ruling is the biblical Antichrist. Not just a biblical Antichrist, but the biblical Antichrist, the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians 2. This is the system of historicism, which has been the historic Protestant way of understanding Bible prophecy, and specifically the Antichrist, going back hundreds of years to not just the Protestant Reformation, but even going back predating the official start of the Protestant Reformation. Most evangelical Christians today are either futurists, essentially dispensationalists. They believe in a future coming Antichrist, or they're preterists. They believe that it's usually the Roman Emperor Nero that they believe that was the Antichrist, and they believe that the vast majority or the entirety of biblical prophecies were fulfilled with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. But when you really get into the nitty-gritty, both of those theological systems, futurism and preterism, were really heavily promoted around the time of the Protestant Reformation by Jesuit theologians. And so those systems really have been pushed into Protestantism because of the influence of Jesuitism, and that's been intentional because they've wanted to get evangelical conservative Protestants away from identifying the Antichrist as the Pope of Rome. And they've done that because they want to lower, as it were, the immune system of Protestantism, because they want to bring the, quote, separated brethren back into the Mother Church of Rome. This has been their goal ever since the Protestant Reformation brought out the quote separated brethren. That's terminology that was adopted at the Second Vatican Council, but this is something that they've been implementing for a long time. So we got Pope Francis. We see that the Jesuits are in control of the Vatican. We see that they're bringing the Roman Catholic Church in a more liberal direction, and we see that they're affirming socialism, communism, the green agenda, greater roles for women in the church, but the one that I believe is most significant is the blessings, the affirming of homosexuals, and this is because they're affirming a sin that is so evil and heinous according to the Bible that it really shows how close we are getting to the biblical destruction of Mystery Babylon, where they've been adding on to the heresies and blasphemies that they've been teaching over the centuries. But things are getting, and the sins that have been within Roman Catholicism have always been terrible for centuries. But with these certain sins, these same sins that God destroyed two cities for, Sodom and Gomorrah, we're literally getting to a time where it just seems that we are getting very, very close to the destruction of Rome, the literal destruction of Rome. And this is something that is very, very significant for Christians because this is one of the great prophetic events that we are very, very close to, the literal destruction of the city of Rome. I'm going to talk about that more in a few minutes. But talking about this, so Pope Francis said that he was going to be open to affirming and even giving his papal blessing to homosexuals, so the LGBTQ plus movement. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise, even though, ironically, many traditionalist conservative Roman Catholics are surprised by this because it goes against their historic doctrine. But this should not come as a surprise to us for two reasons. The first reason is because of the fact that homosexuality has been prevalent within the Roman Catholic priesthood and hierarchy for a long time now. In one sense, it's been prevalent to one extent for centuries, alongside heterosexual sins because of the celibacy requirement. There's always been many different types of sexual sins committed. But this shouldn't come as a surprise because homosexuality's prevalence within Roman Catholicism has grown exponentially in the second half of the 20th century. And then the second reason why this should not come as a surprise to us is because specifically in recent decades, the Jesuit order has been very, very intentional and even aggressive in promoting the LGBTQ plus agenda and really pushing Roman Catholicism to affirm that community and bless them. And for example, the most prominent Jesuit priest that has been doing this is an American Jesuit priest by the name of James Martin. And he's written books on this, on how to minister to homosexuals. He's met with Pope Francis about this, and he's talked about this. So this has been part of the Jesuit agenda for decades now. And some people may be surprised to say that when I say that homosexuality has been so prevalent within the Roman Catholic priesthood for decades now, for the entire this is conservative estimates, but for the second half of the 20th century, there has been a huge increase in the number of homosexuals that have become Roman Catholic priests, and then they've worked their way up to bishops and cardinals. And like I said, these sins have always been there for centuries. Because of the celibacy requirement, you're going to get different forms of sexual sins. Now, sometimes there would be priests and nuns that would have sex with heterosexual partners, and there would be children conceived, and then they'd be hidden. That's been talked about. Various popes have had lovers and have had illegitimate children, such as Pope Alexander VI. And then throughout the centuries, there have been those who have committed homosexual sin. And so that's happened throughout the centuries. But it's been well documented that this has become, the homosexuality element has become more pronounced in the 20th century, and then obviously the 21st century, as we're 20 years into the 21st century. Now, some would say this is just conspiracy theory or it's anti-Roman Catholicism, but this has been documented. There's been books written about this. There have been documentaries made about this. I just have a couple examples here to show. I don't normally show books, but just to validate what I'm talking about here. Here's one book called Goodbye, Good Men: How Liberals Brought Corruption into the Catholic Church. And this book talks about, this is an interesting book because it's written from a Roman Catholic perspective by a Roman Catholic. And what's talked about in this book is how liberal Roman Catholics, modernists, versus the conservative traditionalist Roman Catholics, in the 20th century, they entered into the priesthood, and then they eventually were able to get control of the seminaries and became bishops. And what's essentially happened is that those who met the criteria of becoming priests according to the older conservative traditionalist criteria have been progressively weeded out. But then those who have been liberals and modernists and homosexuals, that they have been the ones that have been brought in, embraced, and moved up the ranks of the hierarchy. So this is something that's been happened that to the extent that even Roman Catholics themselves have documented this. And this is one of the phenomena that's gone on in Roman Catholicism in recent years has been there's a priest shortage. Not as many people are becoming priests. In modern times, some people don't want to live, they don't want to commit themselves to celibate lives. But what this book, Goodbye Good Men, is talking about is that part of their contribution to that problem of the priest shortage within Roman Catholicism is due to the fact that traditional candidates have been weeded out and then liberals and homosexuals have been advanced. So, and this has been part of the greater Jesuit agenda and even the Illuminati Masonic agenda. They've consolidated their control of the Vatican and they've been grooming it more and more and more into their image. And so liberals and homosexuals have taken over the seminaries and that they've gone very, very high up into the hierarchy, to the highest levels of the Vatican. And that's been documented in this next book I want to show called, let me get in front of the camera, In the Closet of the Vatican, Power, Homosexuality, and Hypocrisy, Frederick Martel. Now this is another very fascinating book because of the fact that the author of this is a journalist who's worked in Rome who is a self-professed homosexual. And due to the fact that he is himself a homosexual, he was able, when he was in Rome, that he was able to get certain members of the clergy and certain people within the Vatican to talk about the extent of homosexuality in the Vatican, which is, it's an open secret. It's an open secret that, you may have kind of a don't ask, don't tell culture, but everybody in Rome knows how prevalent this is if you're if you're paying attention at all, if your eyes are open at all to what's going on. The homosexuality is very, very, very prevalent. And so now, because what happens when you live a secret life, when you're hiding such a major aspect of your life, especially something as deep as your sexual relationships with other people, which have an extreme emotional and psychological effect on you as a human being, who you sleep with, and when you're hiding, especially when you're quote a priest or you're a bishop, and it's officially sin, when you hide such a big part of your life. Now, some people wouldn't want to talk to anybody because they're trying so hard to hide it, but ironically, some people they're actually wanting to speak out and talk about what they see because of the immense psychological effect that has on your mind and on the profound effect that hiding that has upon your life. So when you have a journalist like this journalist who is himself homosexual, certain people talk. Some people will tell you more than others, but he was able to get people to tell him what's going on. And if you read the book for yourself, he talks about how the homosexuality is very, very rampant it's in the Vatican, it's amongst the archbishops and the cardinals, and it's not just Protestant anti-Catholicism, it's not, or secular anti-Catholicism for that matter, it's just the truth. It's that homosexuality is rampant, it is very prevalent within the Vatican. So, but for Pope Francis coming out, where it's getting to the point where the Pope himself is saying that he is open to blessing homosexuals, this is a major turn. Even though these things have been going on in secret for many, many decades, and I haven't even gotten into the entire child abuse scandal, which I'm not going to talk about too much in this, but you can see like this sexual deviancy is extremely rampant. But when you get to the point where now you have the Pope of Rome openly saying that he is going to give blessings to these unions, it shows how much the world has changed. It shows how much the Roman Catholic Church has changed. The values of the world have shifted dramatically, even just the past 20, 30 years, let alone the past 50 years, where, I mean, in the early 2000s, politicians were still not coming out and saying they were willing to support gay marriage. I mean, if you go back to 2000, 2001, 2002, it was, these things weren't getting talked about. The values on homosexuality have shifted so dramatically the past few decades, and Roman Catholicism is, we got the Pope. He's right in par with that, and one of the reasons why they're doing this is one, I truly believe that those who are in control of the Vatican, the Jesuits, they want to promote this agenda for many, many reasons, but then also it maintains their relevance in the world. where they're not looked at as the fuddy-duddies that are going against everything that the world has now come to affirm. So there's a plurality of reasons why they want to do this. But that is one of the most significant developments of what happened on the synod on synodality. Now, I think when you read about what happened, it didn't go as far as some of the liberals wanted. They wanted more pronounced statements, this Jesuitical back and forth, testing the waters. I think some of the liberals at the synod were disappointed that some didn't go further. And then the conservative Roman Catholics are obviously they're angry, and some of them are even outraged at there's these talks of these different policies that are going on at all. And it's really interesting that Pope Francis has received pushback from certain conservative elements within the Roman Catholic Church, and it's very obvious that he's not happy about it. So in Tyler, Texas, the bishop there of the diocese there, a man by the name of Joseph Strickland, he's very conservative, he's a traditionalist, he's been very, very outspoken about how he feels about Pope Francis. Well, the past few weeks, Pope Francis fired him. He's been removed from his position of the bishop of the diocese there in Tyler, Texas. And I think Pope Francis is making an example of him because the traditionalists, many of the conservatives, they're pushing back. They hold to the older Roman Catholic doctrine. They don't want to see it shift. They don't want the more progressive liberal Vatican. They want the old the old church that they've known and loved, even though it's still filled with many heresies. But the Jesuits, they're not going to give up so easily. They're going to push this forward, and they're going to silence those who get in their way. And that's exactly what Pope Francis did with this bishop in Tyler, Texas, that when he got pushback, he removed him. He removed this bishop from his position. And then the other man who's really spoke out is Cardinal Raymond Burke. Now, those who don't know who Cardinal Burke is, he originally comes from Wisconsin, but he's been the Archbishop of St. Louis. He's really one of the leading conservative cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church today. He's shown openness to the Latin Rite, openness to maybe even kind of healing the schism that's been there with the Society of St. Pius X, which is a traditionalist Latin Rite grouping of priests and bishops, which have been out of favor with the Vatican ever since the changes that were made in the 60s with the Second Vatican Council. Cardinal Raymond Burke is a conservative, and he's been outspoken at times in his criticisms of Pope Francis. This has gotten him into trouble in the past. At one point, he was the vicar of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, the Knights of Malta. He had a clerical role as the vicar to that position. He got removed from that for various reasons, clashing with Pope Francis. He submitted a number of questions that are called dubia to Pope Francis, alongside a number of other leaders within the Roman Catholic Church, archbishops, cardinals, what have you, and these were official questions questioning the direction of the synod on synodality. And obviously they weren't happy about that. And due to the fact of all of the criticisms that Raymond Burke has been a part of the past so many weeks and months, with everything going on with the synod, Pope Francis took away his privilege of having an apartment in Rome at the Vatican City, and he also withdrew his salary, his compensate salary that Raymond Burke was receiving for that, which obviously seems very vindictive, very punitive, and well, that's what it is. It's Pope Francis doesn't appreciate the pushback he's getting from Raymond Burke. At least that's what we're being led to believe, according to how the news is portraying everything. And I think it's relatively accurate. With Rome and the Jesuits, you can never trust everything going on perfectly, but as best we're able to tell, that's what's going on. So that's what we have here. And so we see that, so we have this Catholic Church there. They've been pushing communism really going back to the 60s, to Vatican II. But that's accelerating. The more adoption of more liberal values, that's accelerating. And then, yeah, the women becoming deacons, maybe someday becoming priests. How far that's going to go realistically, I don't know. Communion for divorced and remarried people, the pushing of the green agenda, and then you have the openness to LGBTQ and the blessings for that. And like I said before, why the LGBTQ plus movement, the blessings for that coming from the Roman Catholic leadership and the hierarchy, that in my mind is the most significant thing. Now, like I said before, Rome is Mystery Babylon, and it's prophesied that it's going to be destroyed by fire. Now, when I was thinking about this, okay, this openness to blessings for LGBTQ plus people, that's very, very bad, obviously. We know that even though it's not politically correct today, homosexuality is a very grievous sin. It is a terrible sin. Um, the Lord condemns it both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's no doubt about it. The cities, you know, homosexuality traditionally has been called sodomy because of the fact that it was practiced in the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah. And what did God do to those cities? Well, he quite literally rained fire down upon them because of their heinous and evil sins. And so, obviously, as terrible as it is, that's really interesting. Now fast forward to this, we have Rome, the literal city of Rome, which has become in its own right, it's a hotbed of homosexuality within the Vatican, within the leadership. And then we get to the point where the Pope is literally affirming the very same sins that God rained fire upon two cities down. Then we have the Pope who is sitting in a city that is prophesied that fire will come down upon it, and he is affirming the very same sin. I don't want to make too much of this connection, but that was very, very interesting to me when I was thinking about it, and I kind of connected those dots in my head. Now, I want to make it very clear at this point, when God brings judgment upon Roman Catholicism, it's going to be for all of the sins that is committed, not just for sexual sins. For all of the sins that this great whore has committed throughout history, such as the promotion of its various heresies and blasphemies and pagan false doctrines. The re-sacrificing of Christ in the Mass, saying just it's the denial of justification by, true salvation by grace through faith. It's a system of works with penance and purgatory, just the re-sacrificing of Christ, like I said, transubstantiation, the exaltation of Mary. The Pope is claimed to be the vicar of Christ, the one who they put him in the place of Christ himself. All of these heresies and blasphemy, like those sins, God's going to judge. And then the persecution of true Christians throughout the centuries, God's going to judge. There have literally been millions of true Christian believers that have suffered terribly under the system of Roman Catholicism. You think of the Crusades that were launched against true Christians, the Hussite wars against the Hussites, the invasions against the Waldenses, and the Inquisition was founded to put down true Christians. There's been the wars against the Protestants in the 16th century and the 17th century, things like the 30 Years' War. And there's been so much, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the persecution of the Huguenots in France. There's just been so much persecution of true believers. And then you take Rome's leaguing together political machinations, the kings of the earth, how they've supported at various times radical evil ideologies like Nazism and now in modern days communism. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. The mother of harlots has many daughters, and they've promoted many evil political ideologies. They've done so much in the world that God's going to judge all these sins. It's not going to be just sexual sins like I've talked about before. But the point I can make is that when we come to a time where we have such evil sins being promoted, I'm talking about homosexuality here, God will, I'm not a prophet and a son of the prophet, but I know that at some point God will judge these sins because he has before, and he feels the same way about them now that he did before. So when I see this synod, the synod on synodality, and I see this massive liberal direction What that says to me is we're getting close. We're getting close. What we've already known before, but it just becomes more prevalent and pronounced in our minds. We're getting close to the time when Rome will be destroyed by fire. And I'm going to read those verses because this is a very, very important prophecy in Scripture in Revelation 18. So if I'm turning, as I'm turning to this passage here, so Revelation 17, I'm not going to go all through all of this. I've done an entire video on this. You can look up my video, Mystery Babylon. This is describing this great woman, this false religious system, this false church that sits upon the scarlet-colored beast. So you have the false church of Rome sitting upon its the political beast, the political power, and it's essentially ruled Europe, or much of Europe, for centuries. But I am going to read verse 18 though, because it says, "And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth." And a separate verse, it's called the city which sits upon 7 mountains. Now, it can also be understood as the city which sits upon 7 hills. Well, which city in the world is the city upon 7 hills, which has been a center of political power for centuries? It's Rome. It's the city of Rome. There's no doubt about it. It's interesting that even preterist theologians who have they've admitted that this city is Rome, but they've tried to point back to pagan Rome, the Roman Empire. But even non-historicist theologians have admitted at times this is Rome. Now, there are some theologians that deny it. They'll try to say it's apostate Jerusalem, or have tried to point to other cities in the world like London or New York or whatever. There's all sorts of theories about this city. But when you really look at it, the city upon 7 mountains, or the city upon 7 hills, the city that reigns over the kings of the earth, there's really no doubt that it's Rome. So that's Revelation 17. Like I said, if you want more info on that, please watch my video on Mystery Babylon, where I describe that entire chapter in much detail. But then we come to the first 8 verses of Revelation 18, where this system is described as being destroyed. Now, when you read the whole chapter, it talks about this city being destroyed by fire, and then the kings and the merchants of the earth weep over the destruction of the city. And they weep over it because it's been the center of political and economic activity for centuries. Once again, it's very much pointing to Rome. But I'm going to read the first eight verses of Revelation 18. "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean bird and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she has rewarded you, and double unto her, double according to her works, in the cup which she has filled to her double. How much she has glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her." So we have this city, which we've already identified as Rome, and it's said it's the habitation of devils, of demons, of fallen spirits. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with this whore, this woman, this city, Rome, the Roman Catholic system, the Pope, Mystery Babylon. But then verse 8, here it is. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, I'll talk about that in a sec, and in death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her. So we see here that the city is going to be utterly burned with fire. I don't know how that's going to happen because it hasn't happened yet, but we know that it will come. And that it says that the destruction, the judgment that's going to come upon the city of Rome is going to come in one day. Now that could be a literal day, or that could be what's called a prophetic day. If you know about the day-year principle, oftentimes in Bible prophecy, a day is equated to, a prophetic day can be equated to a literal year. So it could be that judgment comes upon the city within the space of a single year, or it could literally mean it all comes in a literal day. I don't know because it hasn't happened yet. But the prophecies is clear enough to understand that the city of Rome, the city of Mystery Babylon, which ancient Babylon typologically points forward to, is the city, just as Babylon was literally destroyed by God, that it doesn't exist anymore, so too will the city of Mystery Babylon, which is Rome, is also going to be destroyed to the point where it will be uninhabited. that's that's a major prophecy in Scripture, and Christians in centuries past understood it, but Christians today, if you said, the Bible prophesies the literal destruction of Rome, they look at you like you're crazy. Many have. But the Bible speaks about it, and it speaks about it right here, that this city is going to be utterly burned with fire. Now, I already hinted about the typology here is fascinating, and it's also very illuminating, because of the fact that you have Babylon, you have literal Babylon, you have mystery Babylon. You have the old pagan Babylonian religion, and then you have that very same Babylonian religion with Christian wrapping paper over it, which we call mystery Babylon, or we call Roman Catholicism. Now, the reason why it's called Mystery Babylon is because the old religion of Babylon has been veiled. It's hidden. It's a mystery because it appears to be Christian, but in reality it's pagan. So unless you've had your eyes open to see the truth, it is a mystery. Hence, Mystery Babylon. So when you read the prophecies of the Old Testament about the literal city of ancient Babylon in places like Isaiah 13 or Isaiah 47, we read that before Babylon was destroyed, the Lord prophesied that it would be destroyed and that it would be uninhabited. So we think in the 6th century, Babylon still existed. The Jews went into it and they came out. Even in the time of Alexander the Great, when he conquered the Persian Empire, he went into the city of Babylon. But as time went on, it was destroyed. And to the point where if you go to Iraq today, you could find ruins from the Babylonian Empire, but the city of Babylon, it's gone. It's not like there are other ancient cities in the world like Damascus, which you can still go to. It's interesting in Isaiah 17, it says that that city at one point will be uninhabited too, but that's a different topic. There are very ancient cities in India, in the Ganges River Valley and stuff that are thousands of years old, and they're still go to. But Babylon's gone. It's gone. God prophesied it would be gone, and it's gone. You can't go there today. It's not an active, true city anymore. And its destruction was prophesied, and it came to pass. So then we have Babylon pointing forward to Mystery Babylon. So then we have this city of Rome, and God said it's going to be gone. Or even like it says, utterly burned with fire. We do think of the cities of the plain that where God literally brought fire down upon them. And we think of apostate Christianity in Revelation 11. It's compared unto Sodom and unto Egypt if you read Revelation 11. So that's really interesting. So there is some connections there. There's some typology there. I think if you get into it, you can start to see those dots connected. Once again, very fascinating, very illuminating. Like I talked about, I did a video on World War III, and I talked about how I think we're close to, I believe the Jews are going to get saved. I believe the millennium is going to get inaugurated. Post-millennial understanding of the millennium. Some of these prophecies, we are very, very close, and we see world events happening, and we don't see them all being fully inaugurated in yet, but I believe we're close, and we should keep an eye on these things. We should look onto these things, because the Lord may be bringing some very mighty changes upon the earth in a short amount of time, and as Christians, we should be watchful. The heresies of Roman Catholicism are getting worse and worse and worse. I even saw a story, and I was researching on the internet, and I read that it's part of the interfaith movement. The Jesuits at Georgetown are literally putting a mosque on their campus at Georgetown. Very famous Roman Catholic Jesuit university. They're putting a mosque on their campus. Well, it's interfaith movement overture. So all of these events of everything coming together religiously, politically, economically, the social values trying to get unified under this very demonic, satanic, liberal anti-Christian, anti-Bible, anti-Christ morality system, it's all these things are getting accelerated. And people all across the world, even if they don't look at it through a biblical prophetic lens, they are seeing that the world is changing very, very quick, and we should take watch of this. And another thing that's interesting is Pope Francis, his health has been very, very bad. He's been in and out of the hospital even recently, even the past few weeks. So we may be getting close to another pope being chosen, who will probably be another pope in the same mold as Francis, because he's been appointing cardinals that share his vision. The next pope could be one who accelerates these developments even more. That's very likely. Time will tell. That his successor may be even more progressive and may accelerate this agenda faster. And as bad as this agenda is, as Christians, we should be very, very concerned about it. This promotion of these anti-Christian values all across the world, and this false religion of Rome is being used as a conveyor belt amongst many other ideologies to promote all these things. But we should take heart that the Lord's only going to let it go so far, and we should take heart over the fact that God is going to, that the worse things get, the closer we can see to the Lord dealing with it. And I really believe when we get over that hump, many good things are going to come for the people of God. So we should be watchful, and we should be trusting in the Lord's sovereignty. And due to the fact that we trust the Lord, we should be joyful that the Lord's going to bring all things to pass in the way he wishes in his good time, and that we should be able to rest in the fact that Christ will be exalted over the kings of the earth, just as he has promised all throughout his word. So these things are not going to go farther than the Lord will allow. So just to wrap up everything I've said today, like I said, we see there's the Synod on Synodality. They're going to meet next year. This Synod is supposed to meet again next fall. They're going to come back around. They're going to do it again. So further developments in the next year or so may come to pass, but we see the promotion essentially of liberalism, of social and moral liberalism coming out of Rome more and more. We see Pope Francis taking everything further down his agenda, and it may tie into Bible prophecy. So hence me making this video. So my encouragement to Christians would be, I know not everybody's going to be experts on Rome. Not everybody's going to be experts on current events. They're not going to research everything. I do understand that. But Protestantism has become woefully ignorant of Romanism, of Roman Catholicism. It's become quite an embarrassment that ministers in days past, and even people in the pews in days past, they were much more well-read. They were much more biblically literate, and they were much more historically literate, and they understood that Rome was the greatest threat to biblical Christianity. They didn't look to, they believed that there were many other threats in the world, like Islam or other ideologies, what have you, but they always knew Rome was the greatest threat, and they were much more biblically literate. And today, we don't live in days like that anymore. Most people would view looking at Rome in that way as just a, quote, conspiracy theory. I've experienced that. People have said that to me, like, Joe, these are conspiracy theories, even if it's very well documented. So my encouragement to Christians would be watchful over these things. Within proper reason, it's not wrong to keep a tab on current events. Best thing we can do is be praying over these things and to study. And to study is, if you've never studied historicism before, especially if you're an evangelical, Protestant, Reformed, Christian, any of those things, study Roman Catholicism, how our Christian forefathers, our Protestant forefathers understood. Study historicism. Study Rome prophetically, biblically. Study true church history, what true men of God have believed, and try to view these things through a biblical lens. You're going to be greatly edified if you don't dismiss those things, but with a Berean spirit, study these things from a biblical perspective, taking these things as the Word of God. The Lord's going to bless that. He's going to open your eyes, and your discernment's going to be far greater than it was before. So that would be my encouragement to anybody watching this video. We'll see where the Lord takes these things, but yeah, that's my summary of the Synod on Synodality, how I see these things tying in potentially to Bible prophecy in the future. The title of my video, the Liberal Vatican, because that's the days we're living in. We're living in the days of the Liberal Vatican. So, hey guys, continue to pray, take these things to the Word of God, look into these things, study. And that being said, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. God bless.